Forgiveness is one of those things that sounds simple in theory, but in real life can get quite complicated. Is it something that we do for the people or person that hurts us, or is it for ourselves? Do certain people deserve forgiveness, or are some things too awful to forgive? And should we expect people to forgive, or is that just another way of us telling them to get over it, or shying away from accountability? A lot of people say that forgiveness helps you move on, but others may argue that some things shouldn't be forgiven, especially when justice hasn't been served. So grab a cuppa, because in this video, we're going to break down different perspectives on forgiveness using real-world examples, to examine who deserves forgiveness, whether certain crimes are forgivable, and whether forgiveness should be considered an obligation or a personal choice. Let's take a look at philosophy. Now, philosophers have long debated the nature of forgiveness. Aristotle, the big daddy, in his virtue ethics framework, suggests that forgiveness is a trait that contributes to moral character and social harmony. Some may say that Nelson Mandela embodied this philosophy, choosing to forgive his oppressors after spending 27 years in prison. By advocating for reconciliation rather than revenge, he sought to help unify South Africa and prevent further bloodshed.
I have been saying throughout, let bygones be bygones. Let what has happened pass as something unfortunate, but which we must forget.
But not everyone sees forgiveness as a moral duty. Immanuel Kant argued that forgiveness should not come at the cost of justice. He believed that moral duty required accountability, making forgiveness secondary to ensuring that wrongdoing is acknowledged and addressed. This perspective was evident in the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi war criminals were prosecuted rather than forgiven, reinforcing the idea that justice takes precedent over personal absolution. Then there's utilitarianism, the idea that we should do whatever leads to the best outcome for the most people. Utilitarian thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill suggest that forgiveness is valuable if it leads to the greatest good for the greater number. After the 1994 Rwandan genocide, many survivors forgave the people who murdered their families. Why? Because it helped their communities rebuild. The Gacaca courts, a community-based justice system, allowed victims to hear confessions and grant forgiveness in exchange for the reintegration of former killers into society. Whilst not all victims forgave, this process helped reduce further violence and rebuild the country. From a psychological perspective, forgiveness isn't just about morals. Psychologists argue that forgiveness can be beneficial for a victim's mental health. Martin Seligman and Everett Worthington's research suggests that forgiveness reduces stress, anxiety, and symptoms of PTSD. Holocaust survivor Eva Kor publicly forgave the Nazis, particularly Dr. Mengele, the man who experimented on her and her twin sister.
I, Eva Moses Kor, a twin who survived as a child Joseph Mengele's experiment at Auschwitz 50 years ago, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others. Forgiveness is nothing more and nothing less, but an act of self-healing, an act of self-empowerment.
She argued that forgiveness was not about excusing the crime, but about freeing herself from the burden of hatred.
In my opinion, forgiveness is a seed for peace. Victimhood and anger is a seed for war.
But forgiveness doesn't always mean that you stop feeling hurt. Worthington explains that there's a difference between decisional forgiveness, choosing to forgive, and emotional forgiveness, actually feeling forgiveness. A person may choose to forgive rationally while still struggling emotionally. You can acknowledge an apology and still feel hurt by the actions of the person that's apologizing for them. This was evident in South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC, where many victims of apartheid-era violence said that they forgave their oppressors, but that that didn't mean that their trauma magically disappeared. And sociologists look at forgiveness as a social tool. Like, of course, it's all about society. When entire communities experience harm, forgiveness can be a means of preventing further division, allowing us to move forward without this endless cycle of revenge. That's basically what happened in Northern Ireland with the Good Friday Agreement, which helped end decades of sectarian conflict by encouraging reconciliation between Catholic and Protestant groups. While some victims forgave, others found it impossible, highlighting the complexities of collective forgiveness. And there's also the idea of restorative justice, championed by John Braithwaite, who I hope I've said that correctly. Let me just Google it. SCORE, where forgiveness helps offenders reintegrate into society. A powerful example is Mary Johnson, whose son was murdered. Instead of seeking revenge, she forgave and even befriended her son's killer. Her choice shows how forgiveness can sometimes break cycles of violence. Some people believe in forgiveness no matter what. The Amish community proved this after the 2006 Nickel Mine School shooting, where a gunman killed 5 girls before taking his own life. The victims' families publicly forgave the shooter and even supported his family, demonstrating the commitment to their faith's principle of mercy. But not everyone believes that forgiveness is the right thing to do. Simon Wiesenthal's The Sunflower presents a real-life ethical dilemma in which a Holocaust survivor is asked by a dying Nazi for forgiveness. Wiesenthal ultimately refuses, arguing that some crimes are too great to forgive. His decision continued to spark debate about whether forgiveness should be granted unconditionally or reserved for those who actually show genuine remorse. Many religions teach that forgiveness is important. Christianity, for example, emphasises unconditional forgiveness, as exemplified by families of the 2015 Charleston church shooting victims, who forgave white supremacist Dylan Roof despite the gravity of his crime. Islam also values forgiveness but acknowledges the need for justice. An example of this is survivor of a hate crime Rice Buin, who, after 9/11, was attacked by Mark Stroman. He forgave Mark and actually campaigned against his execution, citing the Quranic principle of mercy. But what happens when some crimes challenge the very notion of forgiveness? Genocide, terrorism, and sexual violence are often considered beyond redemption. Many Holocaust victims refuse to forgive the Nazis, arguing that doing so would dishonour the memory of those who perished. Similarly, survivors of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church have also struggled with forgiveness, particularly when institutions fail to hold perpetrators accountable. And the case of Larry Nassar, the USA gymnastics doctor convicted of abusing hundreds of young women, highlights this difficulty. While some survivors expressed forgiveness, many insisted that justice, not forgiveness, was their priority. And the families of serial killer Ted Bundy's victims struggled with this idea of forgiveness, especially since Bundy showed no remorse, leading many to argue that forgiveness should be reserved for those who genuinely acknowledge their wrongdoings. In cases like these, forgiveness can feel not just difficult, but wrong. Some argue that forgiving people who commit atrocities sends the message that their actions just weren't that bad. But should we expect people to forgive? Victims are often told that forgiveness is the right thing to do, but should they have to? After the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing, where a terrorist killed 22 people at an Ariana Grande concert, some people expected the victims' families to forgive the attacker. Many rejected the idea, saying that forgiveness shouldn't be forced. And sometimes, refusing to forgive is a way of standing up for what is right. Emmett Till's family refused to forgive his killers, believing that doing so would undermine the fight for racial justice. Their stance highlights that in cases of systemic oppression, withholding forgiveness can be seen as a form of resistance. And survivors of domestic violence often face societal pressure to forgive abusers, especially from religious or community groups. However, many argue that forgiveness should not come at the expense of accountability and safety. So, who is forgiveness really for? Some people forgive to heal themselves, others forgive for the sake of peace, and some never forgive at all. Philosophers, psychologists, sociologists all offer different perspectives. Some see forgiveness as virtue, whilst others stress the importance of justice. The hardest cases challenge everything we think about forgiveness. Can you forgive someone who wasn't sorry? Should you forgive when justice hasn't been served? And if forgiveness helps people heal, does that mean everyone should do it? Crimes like genocide, terrorism, and sexual abuse challenge the idea of universal forgiveness, and many victims reject the notion that they must forgive to heal. Ultimately, forgiveness is a choice, not a moral obligation. And no one should be expected to forgive if they're not ready to, or if they never wish to at all. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like and subscribe if you're new. It really helps out the channel. And with that, I'll see you soon.